Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's plane probably flies to the Middle East on autopilot as Blinken is so frequently commuting to Tel Aviv and Cairo, Riyadh, and other major regional destinations. This time around, his focus is on the Biden deal for a prolonged ceasefire between Israel and the Islamist terror group Hamas, which will result in hostage release, but will also let Hamas avoid defeat by the IDF. As Hezbollah clings to its avowed policy of trying its own willingness to stop hostilities along Lebanon's southern border, Israel's dilemma is whether to have two ceasefires, at least according to the Biden administration, or none. How is the Israeli leadership making its way through this maze? With us are two reserve brigadier generals to discuss this matter. From Central Israel, Brigadier General in Reserve Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly a Mossad Intelligence Directorate-Chief. It's good to see you, General.
Hi. Hello.
Also joining us is Brigadier General in Reserve Oren, formerly an Israeli Air Force commander, fighter pilot, and chief of the IDF cyber staff. It's good to see you as well, General.
Good to see you, Jonathan.
Also joining us is our TV7 editor-at-large, Mr. Amir Oren. Amir, set the stage for us.
As we are convening today, there was a minor shakeup of the Israeli government, with former lieutenant generals or retired lieutenant generals Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot leaving the emergency war cabinet. And right now, this week, the fate of the Netanyahu government is still a doubt. He has some parliamentary problems to solve. And we will see whether the American push for a deal, which you described in your introduction, can bear fruit. There was also a report about a unilateral American probe vis-a-vis Hamas to release at least the 6 to 8 American hostages, or those with dual nationality, one of
three of whom have already been murdered, of course.
Yes, but in any event, President Biden, when he unveiled the Israeli proposal, as he put it, made sure that everyone understands that there is also an American stake at resolving the hostage problem. It is not only an American help to the Israelis and the Palestinians and the Middle East in general. President Biden, ahead of his election campaign, wants to show the American people that he is turning every stone possible in order to get the release of Americans. If Israel sees its priorities in a different fashion, this is its problem. But Americans should be released. So we are in the middle of the Blinken tour of the region. We don't know yet whether anything will come out of it. And if you take that along with the minor upheaval in Israeli politics, we are in the same conundrum which you pointed at.
Well, let's turn to General Sofrin. I'd like to ask you about Israel's strategy in all of this. Since on the one hand, we're dealing with Islamist Hamas, within the time allotted and the attempts by the Biden administration to impose a certain ceasefire on Israel, which they intend to start as a temporary, at least semantics, voiced by them, and then turn into a permanent ceasefire with what's yet to be known and seen in the future, will undoubtedly frustrate Israeli efforts to conduct its activities also northward, since the one is not necessarily connected to the other. But what can we understand from the current Israeli position at a time when there are a lot of domestic issues, to say it mildly, and also international pressures that are just accumulating as we speak?
I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu now is caught between, forcing powers from several dimensions. First of all, the government has shrunk a little bit to 64 people, to 64 members of the parliament only, it's a majority, but it's not a total majority like it used to be before. Now, the Orthodox Jews who are at the government, the right-wing people, like Minister Ben-Gvir and Minister Smotrich, have more power to apply pressure on Netanyahu not to go to a ceasefire, to keep on fighting at Gaza, and to demolish Hamas. Just today, when Minister Smotrich talked to people that the families or the people of their families are being abducted and held in Gaza, he said that he won't be willing to pay any price. It's a very high price for releasing these people, and we are endangering the future of Israel and then the Jewish people in all. That means that if you release these people that are imprisoned in Israel, that are considered by him to be what we call lethal murderers, then the outcome will be that people will be killed in Israel, and this is non-starter. That means that the government now is going to be more right-wing than it used to be before, and the pressure upon Prime Minister Netanyahu is going to be bigger and bigger from these two persons that I mentioned before. On the other hand, you have the Americans that are trying to broker a deal to get to a ceasefire in Gaza, to get the release of the people, to get to some agreement with Hamas, to release the people. But on the other hand, he's, I think, more concerned about his survival, or political survival of his government, and therefore he won't apply to the American pressure. And that means that also at the northern part of Israel, meaning at the Lebanese border, Hezbollah will go on engaging Israel on a daily basis, like it does just now, and intensifying its fire, because it links what happens on southern Lebanon to what happens in Gaza, and they say openly that as long as they are fighting in Gaza, we are going to fight you on the Lebanese border.
General Sofrin, within the very challenging reality right now in Jerusalem, of course, it's also a challenging reality in Washington, since the Biden administration is also fighting for its own survival. But how can Israel leverage its operational and tactical achievements in the Gaza Strip vis-a-vis Lebanon and vis-a-vis other arenas which are no less volatile, particularly when we're talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran?
Let's say, first of all, that we are still fighting in Gaza, and we'll go on fighting there for a long time. As long as we didn't have made any decision, or we're going to rule Gaza on the day after Hamas is being demolished, as if, because they keep on fighting, but they changed their attitude, and now it's a guerrilla fight. Small sports that are coming out and engaging our units, and it will go on as long as we are staying in Gaza, as our units are deployed in Gaza. So as long as we didn't decide who is going to rule Gaza and what kind of what shape will be of this governance, the idea that you will begin to create small kind of islands of governance of local people will take a very long time. And during this time, we are going to be deployed in Gaza, and we're going to act there, and people will be engaged, and people will be endangered all the time. And as long as it goes on, the fighting at the northern border will go on just like that.
How can we establish a certain new reality, reality building, so to speak, within a very volatile global situation, since it is not only here in the Middle East that we're seeing those hostilities erupt, but also in Europe, speaking about Ukraine, tensions accumulating and rising also in the Pacific. All of this is interconnected, and naturally, the main ingredient of all of this is not only weak leadership, but the lack of leadership in policy building and strategic thinking. Is there a reality in which Israel could leverage its successes once again into a better reality that would come to the aid of Israel within all of the various complexities at hand?
I think there is, but it needs to be carefully navigated while the leadership, both in the U.S. mainly and in Israel, understand the multi-level complexity of this this whole regional and global struggle that's going on here. I think, you know, when we mention the connection between Gaza and the north and Iran, this whole like the multi-front dilemma that Israel is needs to cope with. The United States has similar but different. So the connection I see and I always talk about is the connection between how the United States operates in the Middle East region and with Iran vis-a-vis what's going on in Taiwan and China. Everything is connected. So the United States global arena is very similar to how we see as Israel our regional arena, because the United States is global and we're only regional. And I think in that sense, that is how I would tie this. Everything we do reflects to the other arena that we are needing to cope with. Having said that, I think there's always a connection between, you know, the near term, the things that happened here and now, and the you know, the goals and the ends we want to sort of achieve. In that sense, I think that Israel needs to step outside of the current thought, the current thought box, if you will, or the concept of how we think about this specific situation that we are in. I think that if we just define the end of the war with Israel being on the Philadelphia line and in the corridor, in the middle of the Gaza Strip, just that as a final status of, okay, we've ended the war and this is how it ends, period. There's no, this is the new reality of how the Gaza Strip it looks like. It's divided into the north and the south, and that is how we navigate the near-term need for Israel to go in and out, to carry out operations that will take care of the rebuilding efforts that will naturally happen from the Hamas's side once we somehow reach a deal, and as part of that deal, some hostages are freed, and hopefully all of them. And I think that's one thing I would mention. The other thing I would mention is trying to think about how Iran is looking at this. So Iran wants to push Israel into the Mediterranean and create something from the river to the sea. The way for the United States, along with Israel, to counter this strategic long-term goal is to declare Israel's eastern border as final, the annexation of the Jordan River as Israel's eastern border, and without talking even about the long-term implication of what does it mean for Judea and Samaria. It means something, of course it means something, but there are many countries in the world that are landlocked, so there's just another landlocked area, which is called Judea and Samaria, and we delay that discussion to a later period when things look different, both in Gaza and in the Judea and Samaria, and with Hezbollah in the north. And again, I can give more and more ideas in that sense. And I think that our biggest problem yet stays to be the hostages, the connection between the war in the south and the war with Hezbollah, which is Iran, and the need to stabilize a long-term deal which builds the more broader regional alliance, aka the Abrahamic Accords, and create a regional stable counter coalition against the Iranians. That's where we have to look, and how exactly we get there, we need to find the ways in the short term in order to get there.
BRICS is, of course, holding its various meetings, its foreign ministerial yesterday, and so on. There was a meeting between the Chinese State Councilor Wang Yi and the Iranian or acting Iranian Foreign Minister Bagheri Kani, during the course of which the Chinese top diplomat highlighted that Beijing is very interested, keenly interested in deepening the strategic relations with the Islamic Republic in all fields, naturally with understanding that Iran is a key component within China's interests, speaking, of course, within context of strategic power competition. And yet, the United States is not countering the Iranians on many fronts and still seeking a foreign policy that the Europeans just over the weekend have told President Biden on a number of levels that it's a failed foreign policy that needs to be adjusted and moderated in order to contend with rising challenges.
Well, the Europeans may not be the best ones to lecture anyone else on policy and failures, but the problem seems to be, and I go back to what Amnon Sofrin quoted from Minister Smotrich, there will be no perfect solution. What Israel should strive for is an optimal one. Yes, of course, you can find flaws in whatever agreement, whatever deal, whatever way this current campaign will end. I can assure you it will not be the last campaign Israel conducts against any of its enemies. There will be other campaigns soon enough, even if this one is considered over. It will be violated by Hamas, by Palestinian Islamic Jihad, by Hezbollah. There will be both a context and a pretext for Israel to hit back at its enemies. Now, what Smotrich has been saying regarding the reward that should not be given Palestinian murderers who are sitting in Israeli jails by being released as part of a deal, this is very simplistic. This is what Benjamin Netanyahu said 40 years ago, and he wasn't original even then. Yes, of course, when terrorists are released from prison, they could kill Israelis again. But those prisoners, by sitting in jail, by Israel not agreeing to a deal in order to gain the remains of two of its soldiers and two Israelis who are alive in Hamas jails, this gave Hamas the incentive for October the 7th. More Israelis have been killed already by Israel's refusal. Of course, Israel is not to blame. We are not blaming the victims. But the fact is that the effort by Hamas to gain the release of these prisoners by a deal and therefore to abduct Israelis, to have them as bargaining chips, this has killed and wounded and, all the other horrific facts. So while it sounds very tempting to say, no, we will not release the prisoners, and by the way, this is a change in Smotrich's position. Earlier, the main obstacle was the end of the war. All of a sudden, he is now reverting to the old condition of releasing the prisoners. Why is he saying that? Because right now, he, along with Ben-Gvir, are left alone in the cabinet without Gantz and Eisenkot to balance them out.
Indeed. Well, General Sofrin, we do not have very much time left, and yet I find it very important to focus also on the northern arena. Strategically speaking, how can Israel recalibrate its northern front to a point where its 101 plus refugees, residents of northern Israel, including roughly 60,000 that have been relocated from a buffer zone of 5 kilometers from the border, and another 40,000 just roughly 10 to 15 kilometers that left on their own volition, are still displaced throughout Israel. And we're seeing daily attacks, including today, repeated attacks against military targets, civilian targets. It's not sustainable.
it is an ongoing war since October 8th, and they're just intensifying the fire. And they gain more courage and more, let's say, backwind to what they do. And they have, they succeed in hitting us very much. Now, when you look at the broader picture, I think that on the current situation, we have to get to some diplomatic arrangement that is brokered. There are efforts to broker it by the US and by the French administration to get to some agreement that actually will imply a 1701 decision, 1701 of 2006, and to pull Hezbollah back about 10 kilometers from the border. But it won't be sufficient. Because they are there, they will get back, or they try to get back to the border, just like they did before. And therefore, I think that on the current situation, we don't have the ability to launch two big operations on both arenas, meaning to keep on fighting in Gaza, to do what we're doing at Judea and Samaria, and to launch a huge attack on Hezbollah in Lebanon in order to push them further or even away, more than 10 kilometers from the border. And I think for the time being, we have to go for to make the effort to get to a diplomatic solution. And later on, to be prepared very well, to be equipped very well, and to be able, upon decision, of course, to launch a huge attack on Hezbollah and to push it back, and to allow the people that are living along the borderline to get back to their homes and live more safely than they had before.
General Rosen, I'd like to hear your perspective on this. Of course, you also have a clear understanding of the situation, but I'd like to even step one level higher, if I may, when we're looking specifically on this challenge called the Islamic Republic of Iran. Should Israel wait for the next administration in Washington to be able to have the right backing to contend with such a reality?
Definitely. I think, we are in realpolitik dominant period right now. Both in Israel and the US, elections are hovering above many of the decisions that are made. Bibi just got a little bit more runway from a tactical, most important, to morale, and super amazing job that the IDF did with the release of the 4 hostages. And in the US, there is also realpolitik, and many of the things are just, it's really clear that everybody needs time, and the time between now and maybe next January, the next administration, whatever that is, so many tactical things can happen between now and then. It's just that every side will have to optimize tactical successes in order to leverage the strategic goal of being reelected. That's how democracies work. Having said that, with the unacceptable situation in the north, I think that, we can do two things. We can let this go until next year, beginning of next year, which I think is just unfathomable. It's just, I cannot think about this going on for over a year, that people are, refugees in their own country. The loss of sovereignty and what this means for other enemies of Israel is just unacceptable. Therefore, I think that in the interim, between now and the beginning of next year, we need to change the strategy. And the strategy, first of all, needs to put Lebanon as a country, as a sovereign country, as the address to what's going on. And I think that will put Hezbollah in the near term under the pressure that we need for them to lower the fire and move back to what was mentioned by General Sofrin, back to the 1701, even if it will be, effective or not. Again, anything can happen in the Middle East, so it will probably happen again and again, and we can take care of that later. But in the midterm, near and midterm, we need to uh, uh, we need to put a higher stake on the other side, and the only way to do that is by raising the price on the country of Lebanon, and the only way to do that is by stating exactly what we will do if the fire does not stop. Therefore, Hezbollah turns from the protector to the destructor of the country of Lebanon and will put a lot of pressure under them and will maybe help the French and the US put the relevant pressure to lower the fire in the near term. That's the only way to maybe have the time to later on have a preemptive attack next year or whatever, and the army can get ready for that. But it's so far away, and we cannot bear with the consequences of this going on for another 8 or 9 months. It's just unacceptable. That's where I think we should take it. And the last thing in the meantime also is the hostage situation. I think that there are two things here. One is, do we free people that in the future will kill? There's no question about it. They will. I think that's a constant, that's a given. The other thing is, what does it do to the morale of Israelis that are going to fight, that always Israel is different in the way it promises its fighters, its warriors, that anything happens to you, we will get you back home. I think that is morally much more important. So in the near term, we will have to pay the price, but it will pay off in the long term because people have the resolve to fight. I know how I send my children to war. I know that if something happens to them, we will do everything to get them back. I think that's more important from the risk of someone hating us, because they will hate us anyway, and they will try to always kill us. Therefore, I don't think that the far right wing has the moral grounds for their position on the hostage situation.
Particularly when we lost all those people on their watch, it needs to be taken into account. But, tactics absent strategy is the noise before defeat, and you cannot have a coherent strategy absent a coherent policy that enables the right practitioners to develop such a strategy. This is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank General Sofrin, General Rosen, and Mr. Oren, of course, for all of your insights, and I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next update from here in Jerusalem. Shalom.